Hey there, what I see is people letting their businesses run their lives versus them leading their business to love their life. I see this in corporate jobs, and I see where we step into expectations that other people have of us that do not honor us and allow us to lead our own life. Welcome to this episode, and I'm glad you're here to listen.
From the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. I have my friend Erica Barnhart here today, and there is something about you, Erica, like you just have this light about you. The first time I met you, I was like, that's somebody like I'm gravitating towards, right? Like this is somebody that, like, I don't know, like a matching of something. I feel like a lot of times we're on parallels with things, but Erica and I just kind of struck up some conversation. I think the first time we met was maybe a coaching session through Spirit of Wealth, and through that, this international mastermind that you've heard a lot of guests that I've met there because there's a lot of interesting people. And Erica is like, you just interest me because the work that you do around communication and who you work with and how you go about it, to me, is just really intriguing. And then how you do that while also putting your hats on for all the different roles that you do, all with a smile on your face. That's one thing that I always notice. And the fact too, that you seem to be really self-aware. And I notice that because sometimes we'll be talking, or we'll be at a retreat together, and you'll say, yeah, I get this. Here's where I'm at. Here's where this is. And so I would like for you to introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them how you show up in the world. And then let's have a conversation about how you lead your lit up life.
Awesome. Thank you, Debbie. I don't always have a smile on my face, but I will say I feel very blessed pretty much all day, every day. And so, things get a little crunchy. I'm still like, this is a good life, I'm blessed. So let's see. I do wear a lot of hats. So let's talk about the hats. I run a company called Claxon. I've actually run that for 18 years. And so what I do, let me back up and say everything I do is professionally is about teaching leaders and their teams how to communicate with clarity and confidence. That's the bottom line. And the reason that that's important is, well, there's lots of reasons, but I would say at least twofold. And one is, the world is very chaotic. And so I think, in terms of a leadership aptitude or skill, communication is like everyone has to be able to do it. And yet we're not taught how to do it well in a business context, right? So a lot of my work is helping people unlearn while they're learning a new way to do that, because to me, it's about connection and compassion. So that's why it matters. And then from a business perspective, bottom line perspective, like clear communication increases your bottom line, right? So it's going to increase awareness, revenue, profits, and ultimately impact. I work with exclusively with people and organizations who want to make the world a better place. So a lot of nonprofits, a lot of foundations, but I always joke, like, I don't actually care about tax status. I do. I care deeply about your volition to make this world a better place, however you define that. But also have worked with, Microsoft and white pages and kind of around that aspect of their work and how they communicate about it. So that's that hat. And then I'm also an associate teaching professor at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington, which for listeners who are not familiar is in Seattle, Washington, where I'm based. And there's a lot of overlap between these, the two hats. They're really one hat, which is all about communication. It's just in different contexts. And then because I'm a mom, I have two teenagers, and I am blessed in that regard too, because they're just fantastic. It's super fun. I have a daughter who just turned 18 and a son who's about to turn 15. They're both still at home. One's a freshman, one's a senior. So yeah, it's
look at you.
I'm married. There's all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what, Erica, it's interesting because, like, as you talk about that, I was reading this book called Lean Out by Melissa Orr, and she's actually coming to Gonzaga in a couple of weeks for a luncheon. And it was interesting because she talked about how I'm not always like, I am woman, hear me roar, but I've seen shifting things happen, because on one side of the law of polarity, there's men who have been given this like societal role of being the provider. And so when they go into a role where maybe they stay home and they help take care of the domestic duties, or even if they're working and help take care of domestic duties, like society and culture sometimes sees that as not okay.
Mhm.
And the same thing goes where with women, we're expected in society, right, to go in and we have multiple jobs because we handle the household and we do all of the things for the household, and we go and do the work that we do, and how we show up in the world. And so when you kind of go, right, like, and I know your husband helps, but I'm just like, there's so many roles that we play. And so one of the things that you talked about, and I don't remember the exact words you used around chaos, but tell us a little bit, because life is chaotic, right? And even over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of chaos energy that's been around. So give us a few ideas, like how do you manage your chaos?
Well, I want to say one thing in chaos is defense. It has
love chaos.
Yeah, well, it has a bad rap, right? We hear, oh, it's chaotic. And I think that implied in that is like, it's bad or it's stressful. And there's some truth to that for sure. But also, I mean, really, in terms of like physics, chaos is generally viewed as a positive because it generates, it's generative. And so there's a lot of creativity that could come out of that. Where we are all at right now is, like our brains, our central nervous systems, a lot of things are fried because of the past 2 years and COVID and all the rest of it. So, for me, the work is, how do you channel your energy? Like in everything, how do you channel your energy? When I teach, I'm teaching about communicate for good, right? The good of yourself, the good of your team, the good of the organization, the good of the world. Underneath that, though, is philosophically this concept of the energetics of language. And so part of how I, on a daily, minute by minute basis, manage chaos is by thinking about the energy of the words, the words that I'm using, and what is their energy, and how can I, if that isn't bringing the energy that I want to quell the chaos or mitigate it or elevate it sometimes, right? Sometimes you want to elevate the chaos if you want to tap into its creative capacities. So that's, I'm, and most of the words that we go through in a day, no one ever hears or reads, right? Like I have a podcast cleverly called Communicate for Good. And I have an episode called The Secret Life of Self-Talk. And it's interesting to me that we sort of separate, part of the point in that, and when I work with my clients, is like, you may think that doesn't come out in what, the blah, blah that comes out of your mouth or your fingertips or whatever. And it does. Because and Erica doesn't know better. Energy doesn't know that, like, that's inside your mind.
Yeah.
Energy,
so for
like,
listeners,
I'm here, hey, and so how can you get intentional about channeling that energy?
Yeah. And I want to back up for a second, because for listeners that haven't heard a lot about energy, or when you think about what you just talked about, can you give us some examples of, like, you're right, the energy that you have when you show up, it shows up with you regardless of how much you try to fake it in a different way, right? And so can you help the listeners understand, like, what are some things that you notice about different energies and how you show up? And then why, when you think about self-talk, you think about the words, we'll go there second, but like, give us some ideas of, if I'm someone that hasn't done a lot of work in energy and I'm showing up, how can I identify when I'm showing up in a higher vibration and when I'm showing up in a lower vibration?
Well, so as with all of this, the first step is just noticing. It's just getting curious and being like, I'm going to go for a day, a week, whatever it's going to be. And I'm just going to note how my energy feels to me. Now, the brave among your listeners, I think, will take the next step, which is like, it has to be people you trust. Okay. So don't like go far and wide with this next recommendation. For your trusted circle, ask them to mirror back to you. Like, what does my energy feel like to you in this moment? Right. And you can get some interesting feedback. I'm a very fast-paced person by nature. And so I have to work to slow down. And oftentimes when I'm coaching, people don't need me moving faster. What they need from me is an energy that allows them spaciousness.
Yeah.
So I'm a fan of naming everything, right? And so I would say for people new to just noticing energy and then channeling is the next step, name the energy that you're hoping to bring to the context, to the situation, to the conversation. And just in naming it, it will naturally shift your energy. And then we all have default settings, right? So like, and especially if we're stressed, we're going to go to our default settings. When I'm stressed, I'm going to speed up. So there's some somatic, I don't know how much you talk about on this podcast, some somatic things you can do. So for me, when I know that what is appropriate and what I need and what my clients need or my husband needs or whatever in the moment, my kids, is that slower pace, that more grounded version of me. I like hold the middle knuckle of my pointer finger on my left hand because I did some work around that. And it just instantly drops me into my body.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So as you're talking, I'm nerding out too, because I'm taking this class called the Neuroscience of Change, and they talk about like having a stance, like physical embodiment of something. And that's what I hear you saying when you say I hold the knuckle, right? Like doing something that has like a click almost in your brain that lets you drop into your body. And ground.
If you can, another one that this is a universal. The middle knuckle tends to work for a lot of people. I did some EMDR work around trauma and releasing it, so that there's an additional piece there. But a universal actually is to tap right underneath your nose, right here, because it's an acupressure point for your central nervous system. So what I love about this is like you can look very pensive and erudite as you tap. I'm thinking, you're not thinking about anything. What you're doing is calm down your central nervous system.
That's a great one, Erica.
Coaching folks who are nervous about public speaking.
Yeah.
Which, is a lot. I'm like, just sit there and just sort of be like, I am an expert in whatever I'm going to talk about. And I am thinking deep thoughts. No, you're not. You're doing what's smart in that moment, which is dropping into your body, calming it down. Yeah. Right.
That's fantastic. And so
can I just say one thing though? Some folks, please. Like in terms of the law of polarity. So I'm a naturally high vibe. Mm-hmm. My work is to slow that down. But some listeners may be like, dude, I wish, because they tend to naturally, beautifully, I want to say, be in this sort of more grounded, slower pace. Society doesn't reward that. Our society, like North American society, does not reward this. And yet there is deep wisdom and beauty in that. And we need both.
Yeah.
So I just really want to say that for any listeners who you have a more of a dorsal default. We need both. We need all of this in order to have balance. If everyone was like up here with me all the time, good gravy. Talk about chaos. Oh my goodness.
Erica, that's great. And I think about too, like sages, right? Like in tribal type of thing where like you have these wise sages that I just think of that being kind of that like calming piece. And so along with that too, you were talking about the energy of words, and I talk about how words are important. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we use words. I do it. And I'm thankful I have friends that call me out on it too, that we use as crutch phrases. We have words that we use and we don't even realize that we're providing negative talk about ourselves. We use words without thinking. And I know one of the things that we were talking about was intentionality and mindfulness. So talk a little bit about like what you even share with companies that you work with and people that you work with around this whole idea of the energetics of language. I love that.
So the thing to understand first is, and we've all heard this, every listener has heard this phrase, words matter. Mm-hmm. So they matter because they are matter. They are like our glasses, our pencils, a table, whatever. Everything in the universe holds energy, including words. And we do this odd thing where we like separate the words, like that's a separate thing. They don't have energy. They do.
Well, it goes back to, Erica, I think about even back in grade school, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words won't ever hurt me, right? Like
that's absurd. That is patently absurd.
It's crazy.
Right? We have
Sorry,
all,
that came into my mind.
all been hurt profoundly by words, either intentionally or unintentionally. The impact, intent versus impact, doesn't right? So that's like the first thing to grok is words matter because they are matter. And once that really sinks in, and so as with all matter, they have energy. And because it's just a combination of things coming together, I really encourage people to notice. So this is the difference between Newtonian and quantum physics. Okay. So Newtonian is very like cause and effect. And it's very, 17th century, but we've sort of like clung to it because it's like a lovely thought that everything is linear, predictable. If I do this, this happens in a predictable fashion. If we didn't know this before, we know it now after COVID, like that's not actually how the world works. But we won't go deep into this, but with quantum, it's sort of like things are going to happen, but we're not going to feign predictability. There's a probability, right? That will happen, but we don't know when. And it's all about like, there's no objectivity. It's all about how things are relative to each other. And so what I love about that is it invites you to think about, how are my words impacting me relative to me, relative to who I want to be in the world? And this is back to self-talk. Like, it's so important, right? Because you're creating a relationship, and that relationship has energy, right? So there's a ripple effect to all of this. And so like, I'm a huge fan of one-word mantras. Multi-word mantras are just, who has time for that? And so like, oh gosh, I can't believe Katie Storino, who's an influencer in sort of the fashion space, and I hate this term, but sort of plus size, empowerment and all of that. Also, she's hilarious. And she wrote a book, and in it, she talks about the power of the word nope, N-O-P-E. And I invite everyone listening to just experiment with this. When you catch yourself saying something negative, like something you wouldn't say to anybody else, but for reasons that allude to all of us, it seems appropriate to say it to ourselves. Like the one person that we are in most relationship with, we are meanest to on balance. Yes. And when you catch it, as soon as it starts, you just go, nope, nope.
I love that. I love that.
And it's sort of playful, right? Because we can quickly, especially if you're early on with trying to, turn around your self-talk, be like, oh my God, there I go again. Oh, like there's a ton of shame and blame. So I love nope, because it's like, nope, we're not going to do that. Nope.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I'm not available for that. Right. But in a one word.
But it's one word.
Right. I love that.
This is another thing that you can do. Like if you're going to walk into a challenging conversation, just come up with one word. Because there's a ripple effect to all of that. And how is that one word inside your brain going to influence the words that come out of your mouth? And then, and again, this is the most important part, what's the relationship that's going to create, and what's the energy of that, right? So you can also reverse engineer from like, envision the outcome you want. This is work you do all the time, Debbie, I know. Like, what's the outcome you want? And you do it at like sort of a life level, that vision casting, but you can do that in smaller increments.
Absolutely.
And there's, and it's just a habit of mind.
Yeah. Now, Erica, let me ask you, this is a little different than communication, but one of the things too that I teach is not only like see the vision. We don't have to know the 1,000 steps to get to the vision, but even in smaller increments, like sometimes I struggle with this concept of, I see the outcome I want, but how can I go about it without being attached to that outcome?
Oh, yeah. That's
any thoughts on that? A wise one.
I'm like, do I have thoughts on that? I have thoughts on some,
or just conversation around it.
What came to mind for me is, and probably because I was primed by your setup there, is I think we ought to hold fiercely to our visions and not hold the vision lightly, but we conflate the what with the how. And so for me, it's always like, I'm not going to give up on that vision unless there's some very compelling reason to give up on that vision. I'm going to hold it. I'm a very practical person by nature. And so my work and my growth edge was what you were just saying is, I don't know how I'm going to get to that vision most of the time because it's so big and I've never done that before. It's the idea, right? I've never gotten there before. So I think it's about holding the hows very lightly and also realizing there usually are like a ton of different ways to get to the vision. But again, in our Newtonian construct, we're taught there's a way, right? Right? Psychological safety. There's a way. And if I don't know the way to get to my vision, I kind of give up on it. That's just patently untrue for almost everything.
Yeah, that's so true.
And so part of my mental work that I do is like literally seeing all these sort of like skiing, you know, there's a bunch of different ways down the mountain, right? And I'm here to tell you, I'm going to go down a different way than my husband, who is a phenomenal skier. Usually I'm not going to follow him down the mountain.
Yeah.
I'm going to go my way, but we're still getting down to the bottom of that mountain or the top of the mountain.
Absolutely. And you make me think about too, the fact that psychological safety is important, and we create our own psychological safety by building trust in ourselves, by the self-talk, the words that we put into our brain. I'm thinking about when you talk about skiing, like every year, I love the blues. I'll ski a few black diamonds, right? And where I live, Schweitzer is a tough mountain. And I realized that when I went and visited some other mountains this last season, and I'm like, oh, wow, this is a black, this is easy. But maybe I haven't visited everywhere, but like the ones I did. And so what I find is when I'm in a space where I know I can do it, right? So I have the confidence. I'm still like one way over. I'm like, please, dear God, please, dear God. Then the other one, you are Wonder Woman, you are Wonder Woman, right? Like I'm just making my way down it. But it's that self-talk, because even skiing is a mental game.
Yeah, it is.
80% of, or 90% of skiing is even a mental game. And so when I think about that and the importance of the words that we speak to ourselves, and I love how you talk about the what and the how, and like, which ones are you hanging on to as far as the outcome? We could have a whole hour-long conversation.
I mean, a lot of the work that I do, especially when I'm doing sort of organizational messaging, but also with leadership, is always becoming attentive to the why, the what, the who, the how, always in that order. And then the why attached to why is that the what, why is that the how. So the why is really all encompassing to that, but it's, you know, from a communication perspective, it's why are we doing this?
Yeah.
What does success look like? Who are we looking to engage, or who are we in conversation with if it's interpersonal? And then how are we going to do it? But we actually generally start with the how, and then we make up a bunch of excuses for why that how is the best how. And
true.
so,
we try to justify it into those other areas. So I
we
love
reverse
that.
engineer justify into it. And so having that be last, and again, holding very lightly to that, there's so many hows.
Yeah. Yeah. So you start out with, let's say that again, because you just whipped that off really quickly. Yeah. So you start with the what.
Yeah. What, who, how, grounded in the why. What does success look like? Or what's the outcome you want to achieve? However it makes sense to you to phrase that. It's the what.
Right.
What's the end game? Who? So who do you need to engage in order to achieve that goal or that outcome? And sometimes you know the who first, especially leaders, you know, if it's like, okay, I'm having a one-on-one, you know the who. So then go back. What does success look like for this conversation, for this quarter, for the year, right? With this person. So what, who, and then how. And this is really, I mean, I'm doing a lot of research and work around hybrid environments right now.
Yeah.
Remote and hybrid environments. And so one of the impacts of that was a lot of our hows were taken away. And others were opened up. Yeah. So it's just
the chaos that you talk about, the creativity of not a different
but we haven't quite, you know, cozied up to some of these new hows. And we might never. And there really are some really complicating factors to hybrid environments. But that's, and then the why piece is, so that's the what, and this, I mean, basic goal setting, right? Yeah. Why does that what matter? Why do we care about achieving that outcome or that result? And that does a lot in terms of brain science, that does a lot in terms of resilience and determination and all sorts of things, like, because things might get tough. So understanding the why, the who, why is this the person who needs to be involved? And then the how is sort of the rationale for it. So why are these the mechanisms or the messaging or the way in which we're going to move forward? So
yeah, I love that, Erica, because I've never actually thought about the fact that asking the 5 whys, or, digging to the heart of that in each of those areas is important. It's usually the outcome that we're talking about. Why is that it's so important? Why is that so important? Why is that so important? But those other steps are really important. So yeah, thank you for that.
Welcome.
I know one of the things that we talked about in the beginning, and as we kind of come to a close here, was around when you're thinking about, we started out talking about all the hats that you wore and thinking about this idea of leading your lit up life. Like, share with us some of the things that you feel like you're leading your lit up life. And I know, like, one of the things that we've kind of talked about throughout this too is this intentionality of it. So just give us a little bit of a background as far as like where you came from, what made you decide to go into business for yourself, and how you kind of manage all of that with intentionality.
So I went into business for myself when I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter, which is how I know I've been in business for 18 and a half years. Because she just turned 18. And to be honest, I didn't think that I thought I would do it for a while and then go in-house again. But I had already, so out of college, so I come from sort of a long line of, we joke like people who aren't good at having bosses, but my grandpa started an electrical company. They actually wired UC Santa Cruz campus, fun fact. My dad worked for himself back in the day, like very unusual in the 80s. Who worked for themselves from home in the 80s? My dad. Yeah. So there was modeling of that. So, I was a paralegal through undergrad, always thought I'd be a lawyer, then worked for lawyers, then decided I didn't want to do that. But I realized I could make more money if I had a contract paralegal company. So I did that out of undergrad. So like I had done this a few times, but I thought I would go back in-house. And then, when I was first starting out, what I was mainly, I've always been hired for words, but it was sort of like writing website copy or newsletters, or it was less the strategic stuff that I do now. And there was just a ton of work, and I could do it while like juggling. I don't recommend that. It didn't, I had contracts with, like, I had big contracts while my daughter was a newborn. And so then it was, on the one hand, I was like, yeah, I can like have a call with so-and-so while I'm, while I'm juggling this. But I would say this is one of the things in terms of your question about like what makes my life lit up, paraphrasing your question, that wasn't a lit up life. Part of that was I was in my first marriage, which was not as happy as my current one. So there were some just practical financial concerns and requirements around that. But I convinced myself, and I love the intellectual challenge of my work. Like I get to do a lot of really cool things. So I convinced myself that was enough. Like having a really lit up career was enough. And then I had these beautiful babies, and another one 3 and a bit years later, and they're amazing, So there is true joy in that. But I think one trap I fell into, and that, I think a lot of women fall into, especially moms or, people who parent, is that you decide, because you have to be so present for your kids, you convince yourself that that's enough. And we're fed this line. And again, I think this is socialized, that like the biggest joy of your life will be being a mom. And to a certain extent, that's true. But that doesn't mean it's the only thing that can bring you joy. And then your kids grow up and they leave and you're like, wait, what?
Yes, I do know. Yes, I always say parenting is from the very first moment that they're born is a learning in how to let go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I know. And now I have these very independent teenagers, and I'm like, I guess I ticked that box because I like never see you. Hi, bye. Okay, what? Yeah. So the phase I'm in right now is giving myself the space to be like, what beyond?
Yeah.
What beyond? And I do love skiing. My best days in a given year, some of those are definitely going to be being on the mountain with my husband and my son. My daughter, alas, opted out of skiing. I just love being on the mountain with them.
Yeah.
That is pure joy. So it's just finding a few more, adding to that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fantastic. Erica, thank you so much for being here today. And as always, I could have a 3-hour conversation with you about just things as we start to talk and have a generative dialogue. And so I so much appreciate your time. And thank you so much for being here. If someone wants to learn more about what you do and who you work with and why you do what you do, and how you do it, where would they go?
Website is the best place. So it's Claxon, CLAXON, no T, -communication, no S.com. So that's a good place. I'm mainly on social. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm actually a very private person. So that's where I play for a lot of reasons. Those are 2 places. And then if they want more kind of on the energetics of language and how to apply that to leadership, the podcast Communicate for Good is a free resource as well. Yeah.
Perfect. And we'll have Erica's website in the show notes. So feel free to go check her out. And Erica, thank you again so much. It's been a pleasure. And
thanks for having me, Debbie.
Absolutely. And with that, folks, we will see you next week. And thanks so much for listening.
See the colors of the rain. Find your own kind of happy. See the colors of